years ago to understand what's happening today. Here's what we need to know from 10 years ago to understand what is happening today. That is almost gone from American political coverage, but I don't think that ever left Tim.
No, I think inside himself, he truly was an historian, and he was so proud that his son Luke was majoring in history and loved history. And I think to make a great journalist, you're really so right. There's so much that's present today that so many journalists, they don't know much about, 50 years ago, 20 years ago. They don't have time. They don't have time to think about it. But this was Tim's original love, and you can tell when you talk to him that history was there, and that's why it was such an honor for me to become his friend, because he loved to talk about the past. We'd sit there sometimes talking about FDR or talking about Truman or talking about Teddy Roosevelt, and he knew so much. And there were times when I'd be on his show to talk about a book that I'd written, and it was embarrassing because he asked me a question about my own book that I didn't even remember from having written it 5 years earlier.
I'll throw that one at Pat Buchanan. Did he ever stump you on something? Did he ever know anything about you or about your experiences or the people you worked with that you didn't know, Pat?
And then I'll get him out.
Well, I'll tell you, Keith, I don't know that was exactly it. But when you're talking about this, what's going to happen to the program, I think I recall, and I might be wrong about this, that when Jefferson became the ambassador to France, the French asked him, "Are you here to replace Dr. Franklin?" And he said, "I'm here to succeed Dr. Franklin. No one can really replace him." I think the show, Meet the Press, that Tim Russert did it cannot be the same again and will not be the same, because he put his mark upon it. He made it his. He moved it beyond where it had been. And it is permanently identified, I think, in these 2 decades with Tim Russert. And I don't think we're going to be able to, I think probably it's going to be different. It simply will not be the same without him. Every Sunday, you have millions and millions of Americans see it. They see it repeated. Monday morning, they read about who was on Meet the Press. They look at the panels he had and the interviews he had. Everyone looked forward to it as the big battle of the weekend, or the big issue of the weekend, the big story of the weekend, the major candidate of the weekend, the major person. And they're always right there. And Tim is sitting right beside him, and then he's dropping the screen. And it's part of the furniture of our lives. Meet the Press was for the last 2 decades. And it is, I just don't know how it will be the same again.
How will what we need to know about this election campaign, and we can talk about how many sadnesses are contained within the major one, the loss of our friend and our leader here. But the idea that this happened, obviously, on the Friday of Father's Day weekend is heartbreaking in and of itself, for, as so many others more eloquent than I have pointed out, his relationship with his father and his relationship with his son Luke. But on top of this, we finally get through this extraordinary primary season and we lose Tim Russert. What are we not going to find out? How are we going to fill, what kind of vacuum, let me put it that way, what kind of vacuum do we have to fill in terms of the information needed to make the correct choice, whatever people might think that might be, in November? What does that gap look like, and how do we fill it?
I don't know how we fill it. I honestly don't, Keith. The gap is huge. It's not only every Sunday that he's there, and he's asking the right questions. And as I say, it is the major issue or concern of the week. I've been on Tim's show at times where he would call on a Friday, say, "Pat, you were set for Sunday, but the big breaking news is hit. We'll give you a time next week. We've got to deal with this." So he dealt with the #1 story of the week, and he advanced it into the new week. Everyone looked to that. I don't know how you can fill that between now and November. And what he did such a fine job of, Keith, is when we were up there, is when we ask him questions, you talk to him, he raises the questions that really ought to be raised that a lot of folks have not yet raised. And what about this? And how is he going forward? And how is he or she going to deal with that issue? As a commentator, as an analyst mainly, but as an interviewer, and as someone who held the major spot of the week. And that show was #1, quite frankly, in the political season. We're just going to be without it, I'm afraid.
Our coverage is going to continue throughout the night, just to keep everybody updated on where we're going on this. My seat here is going to be filled by Andrew Mitchell at the top of the hour. So I want to give our two guests at the moment a simple setup to give us a final thought on Tim Russert, his place, their friendship. Doris Kearn Goodwin, give me about a minute or so, if you would, on Tim Russert, if such limitations are acceptable.
Well, I think for any of us who were fortunate enough to be his friend, and I include lots of people who watched him on television, it's the mark of how vibrantly alive he was, how he warmed all of us in his presence, that makes it so hard to imagine a world without him. People will miss him in a very visceral, emotional way. I was more emotional than I even imagined I would be when I first heard this news, and I think that's joined by thousands who knew him well and by people all around the country. This man will be so very missed.
Pat Buchanan, your final thoughts.
Because of who he was and where he came from and the things that shaped him and the institutions, many of them are gone now. They are not what they were. We are in a brand new era. We're not in the 1950s where Tim Russert grew up, or in the 60s where he matured into a man. And how he reflected what produced him in the way of schools and church and family and faith as it was in those times and days. I don't think we're going to see his like again because he was unique. He was sui generis. And he came out of, as I say, an era and a time and a place that are sort of vanishing. And maybe it's a better era we're in now. But there's a lot of us who love that old era. And when I talked to Tim Russert or met with him, there was a camaraderie there that went back, way back when we were living miles apart, but it was the same sort of experience. We're not going to see his like again, Keith.
Pat Buchanan, my great thanks to you. Doris Kearn Goodwin, my great thanks to you on this sad day. Thanks for sharing with us. Thanks for helping me get through it. Barbara Walters was on, I guess now 2 hours ago, talking about this loss being as keen as that of a leading political figure in our nation. And I think that really does sort of sum it up. Bob Schieffer, his friend and rival, the host of Face the Nation on CBS, saying that it really was, Tim Russert was so good at what he did and so good as a person that you didn't really expect to do that much in competition against him, and we're very proud when you did. I will just say in conclusion, and we'll bring you a special edition of Countdown at 8 o'clock Eastern Time, that I've had a lot of experiences in broadcasting, but I don't know that anything has ever moved me to the degree of pride and almost childish joy as having asked Tim Russert, maybe once a week, something on those Tuesday nights and have him say, "Great question, Keith." No greater compliment ever. Tim Russert. Go get him. Andrew Mitchell picks up our coverage now. Andrew.
Coming out.